Hey everyone, welcome to Music is a Journey. I'm Peter Scove, and today we're going to take a look at some classic British heavy metal. So let's cue the music. You know, I'm always amazed at the creativity of British people. I mean, you give them tea, they give you a meal. You tell them a joke, they give you the Ministry of Silly Walks. You give them farming equipment, they give you Jethro Tull. And one of the things that I'm always really grateful for to come out of Britain is the new wave of British heavy metal. That set a new standard and a new image for heavy metal music to take off into the 1980s. Now, of course, the new wave of British heavy metal gave us a variety of legendary bands, such as the progressive rock-influenced Iron Maiden, the pop metal kings of the 1980s, Def Leppard, the progenitors, if you will, of thrash metal and black metal with Venom. You have like the classic sound of Saxon, and there were just a whole bunch of other bands out there. A lot of them managing to release 3 or 4 albums in the 80s before, kind of coming to an end. Some bands really struggled to get an album or 2 out, or even just cut some demos. And if you dig deep enough, you'll find that there were bands all over the country. And one of the bands that caught my attention a little while back was a band called Hammerhead. Now, they didn't really seem to be all that of great interest just because there wasn't really any output in the 1980s other than a single. However, Hammerhead have come back to my attention again thanks to one Buzz Elliott, who is the guitarist or one of the 2 guitarists for Hammerhead. Let's take a look at Hammerhead's history here. The band actually formed around 1976 with Brian Hodgson on guitar, vocals, and Moog synthesizer, Steve Archer on bass, and their friend Maurice Ray on drums. The band was initially called Destroyer. However, after a couple of years, they changed the name over to Hammerhead. In 1978, the 3 gentlemen entered the studio and recorded a set of tracks to put down for a demo. This demo kind of floated around and was maybe handed out as cassettes at concerts, but it didn't really do anything for the band insofar as getting them any kind of recording contract or anything. Around 1979-1980, the band acquired a 4th member with Mr. Buzz Elliott, who had previously played in a band called 8 Hertz. And of course, around 79-80 was also the time that the new wave of British heavy metal was becoming a big thing. You had Kerrang! Magazine coming out, and journalist Jeff Barton, who helped to popularize the phrase of new wave of British heavy metal. You had rock shows, Friday Night Rock Show with Tommy Vance, and bands such as Iron Maiden, Angel Witch, Def Leppard were cutting albums. Saxon, lots of other bands were cutting albums, and they were being sold overseas and actually, doing something good. So Hammerhead, of course, wanted to be part of the scene, and with no record label really taking interest in them, they went into the studio in 1981 to cut their own track. By this time, the drummer had changed. They now had a fella named Buzz Elliott on drums. But anyway, the 4 of them went and cut a single called Time Will Tell. Sounds something like this.
You never worry about the way you look. You never seem to have much luck. It's too to drink now, it's just too much. I think your mind is out of touch. No one can help you that you can't see. You're the one that holds the key. Maybe you've gone too far. Only time will tell.
Time Will Tell was backed with another song called The Lonely Man, which had actually appeared on the original demo that they cut back in 1978. The Time Will Tell single actually made it to number 5 on the British heavy metal charts, and it did start getting the band some attention. However, Jeff Barton gave them an unfavorable review, and it was kind of split. Tommy Vance was actually playing both of the songs on his Friday Night Rock Show. Friday Rock Show, but the band was still struggling. Around 1984 then, they went in the studio again to cut another demo. However, this time there had been some more changes. We had now Frank Hall on drums, and this is an interesting point because Frank Hall had been the drummer of another band from the Cumbria area of England. Sorry, that's where Hammerhead were from. A Cumbria area band that was called Necromandus from the early 70s. Now, Necromandus had actually been more of a heavy rock and progressive rock band, often said to be Yes Plays Black Sabbath. I think they were more technical actually than heavy, but they did have some heavy tracks, and one of those tracks was a song called Don't Look Down, otherwise known as Nightjar. And Necromandus got the attention of Black Sabbath. I think they actually toured with them a bit, and then finally Tony Iommi decided to manage the band. They recorded an album, and then they went on tour over in Europe and told their audience that their new album, their debut, was going to be released. However, while they were away, Black Sabbath got sent off on tour to the US. So when Necromandus returned to England, they found their manager gone, and guitarist Baz Dunnery had more or less had enough with the whole thing of all these years of waiting for something to happen, and the big opportunity just suddenly apparently slipping out from their fingers. He decided best for him to leave the band, and with the guitarist gone, the record label just thought, well, there's no hope for this band now, and they shelved the record. Necromandus then went their separate ways. However, there was a slight return in the mid-70s when Ozzy Osbourne actually quit Black Sabbath and decided to start his own band called Blizzard of Oz. And he called in Frank Hall and a couple of the other Necromandus members and had a kind of, weekend wild time at his farm, which didn't really result in any ideas musically, but just a lot of silliness and craziness. So Blizzard of Oz wrapped up very quickly, and Ozzy returned to Black Sabbath, and Necromandus members went their ways. But anyway, drummer Frank Hall found himself there behind the drums for Hammerhead in 1984, and singer Billy Branch actually came in to record a couple of tracks on the 1984 demos, taking the lead vocal for an old song called Lochinvar, which Brian Hodgson had actually written in a previous band he'd been in called Bitter Harvest way back when, and a song that had actually been in the Hammerhead set ever since pretty much the beginning. Billy Branch also sang on the Hammerhead cover of the Necromandus song Don't Look Down. Now, it's kind of interesting, during the 1980s here, there was a compilation album called NWOBHM, Thunder, New Wave of British Heavy Metal 1978 to 1986, which included Time Will Tell, and there was another compilation called It's Unheard Of, which included the Billy Branch sung Lochinvar demo. But by 1986, Hammerhead had more or less, like with many new wave of British heavy metal bands who didn't achieve the status of Iron Maiden or Def Leppard, they just decided that was enough and they packed it in. Still, Hammerhead achieved an appreciable amount of success with their song Time Will Tell. Also, they had opened for a lot of great bands such as Uriah Heep, Budgie, the Mach 3 Whitesnake, Michael Schenker, and a lot of others. Now, the band actually reformed in the mid-1990s for, I don't know if it was a one-off gig or just a few gigs, but anyway, they all went their separate ways again. However, things were to get interesting in 2005 when Buzz Elliott got a call from a friend who asked if Hammerhead would get together to play a one-off gig. Buzz said that he would do it, but he wasn't so sure the other band members would be interested. However, Steve Archer and Brian Hodgson both said they would do it. Just their drummer, their final drummer near the end of the career, he was engaged in something else on that very date and couldn't get out of it. But Buzz had been playing in a covers band, and he asked his drummer from there, a fella named Tony Steele, if he would be all right to learn the whole set and play at the gig, and he agreed. So Hammerhead played that one gig, and this is where things really get interesting. For the performance, Buzz decided that he would put together a CD of their best demo recordings from the past, as well as their single and the B-side. He made 100 copies to sell at the gig and sold 16. All right, so, nothing really all that interesting. But then he decided to try to put the remaining copies on eBay, and very interestingly, they sold out. It seemed that there were people around the world who had an interest in Hammerhead. And here's the thing, by the time the internet started coming out, a lot of these old classic albums from the past had been remastered and remastered again, and people were starting, some people anyway, were starting to look for the overlooked gems, the bands that had only ever managed to get a single album that had slipped off into obscurity, or bands that had only ever managed to get out a single or a demo. These bands were becoming of interest, and so a lot of people, it seemed, wanted to know more about Hammerhead and get a hold of more material. So, at this point, a label in Greece contacted the band and said that they wanted to release that CD that Buzz had prepared as an official release. And that became the album Will to Survive, which was released in 2005.
Running down the street, don't know what they're gonna meet. Radiation's all around, don't know what's going down. They have the will to survive. They don't care if they live or die. That's what they sing from the start to the end. They don't care 'cause they're living in sin.
Now, with the money the band got from that, Buzz suggested to the rest of the members, why don't we go into the studio and record the rest of our songs from our 1980s set that never had a chance to be recorded. And so they did, and that resulted in the album Headonism. Yeah, I know, it's not Headonism. It actually is spelled as Headonism. So now let's just take a little bit of a listen to a couple of the tracks, some short clips from a couple of the tracks off Headonism.
Game is over.
So, now it seemed that Hammerhead had finally released all of their material, and does that mean the band could call it a day? Not really. Now that the band actually had some albums out there that were available, they started getting calls if they would play some festival or some, actually a lot of prog festivals even, but also do gigs here and there. And so the band actually began touring a bit. Nothing major, but they got on the road again, and realizing that there was now interest in the band, they decided to get themselves a real frontman, a real vocalist, so that the band could concentrate on cranking out the tunes. So they got in a fellow, Steve Woods, nicknamed Pecker, to come in and be their lead vocalist. And as time went on and the band continued, they decided, let's put together an album of all original new songs. So, 2015 saw the release of The Sin Eater, the first Hammerhead album of fresh material since the reincarnation of the band. And now, let's give a listen, a couple of short clips from a couple of the tracks off of The Sin Eater.
When will the angels fall? When will they fall? When will the angels fall? When will they fall?
Now, around this time also, they had more ideas and they started to talk about a second album. But, you know, money was still tight, the band was still not huge, and so things kind of got stretched out a little bit. There was a premature booking of a studio when the songs hadn't really come together yet. They had the idea to record a massive, like a 22-minute epic track with the theme of the Crusades, but things were taking a bit of time. And then their record label, High Roller Records, which had released Headonism and The Sin Eater, decided that they also wanted to release all of Hammerhead's older recordings, the old demos, the single and everything. And so the record label put out the album Destroyer, using the band's original name as the title for the album. By this time, of course, Brian Hodgson and Steve Archer were not so keen on having the old demos released anymore, because by now the band had established a new sound and a new standard for their recording. But Buzz convinced them, you know, that there would be fans who would like to hear the early days of the band. I'm one of them. And so the album was finally released, and then with the money they got from that, they would be able to fund the recording of the next album. However, at this time, the coronavirus, COVID-19, broke out and things got totally disrupted. In fact, Steve Archer was actually on vacation in Spain, or was in Spain at the time, and ended up getting stuck in Spain for 3 months before he could return to England. So anyway, things took time, but it also allowed them to work on the songs more. And one of the things they wanted to do was to test the songs out live. So finally, when the bars started opening again and the band could start playing some live shows, they were able to work the material more. And at last, then just here in April of 2023, they came out with their latest album, Lords of the Sun. Lords of the Sun is a 5-track album, basically, where tracks 2 and 3 make up that big epic about the Crusades, leaving the green and pleasant land of England, heading out across the burning plains into the desert to, you know, fight under the banner and free the Holy Lands, but then basically facing a bloodshed and murder on the desert sands, and you know, ultimately regretting the decision to go and do this. They could have stayed at home and lived out their lives instead of dying there in the desert. The song, through both parts, goes through many different movements, both from the kind of more traditional heavy metal style, some other more piano and acoustic parts, a little bit more of a heavy doomier part, more rockin' parts. It's a really cool, well-developed track, and I'd like to play a couple of samples of that. But let's move on, first of all, with the other tracks on the album. We have 3 other shorter rocking tracks. Waiting for the Daisies opens the album. We heard the beginning of that at the beginning of this video. We've got Faithful Heart, which is a little bit more of a simple rocker. And finally, Crimson Tide, which is a wonderful, heavy metal piece. So let's listen now to a couple of clips from the extended track there, Lords of the Sun, parts 1 and part 2. I'll play maybe about like 3 separate parts from that, and then let's hear a little bit of Crimson Tide as well.
Across the burning plains, hearts aflame, mighty death strive to the Syrian hordes, guarding England's cause, free Jerusalem. promised paradise, where the heroes' tales are told.
Now the CD actually comes with some bonus material. We have a song called Tears Like Rain, which is an acoustic kind of, heartbreak song. Kind of reminds me of the More Than Words, Every Rose Has Its Thorn kind of late 80s acoustic hair metal ballad type thing. It's alright. And then we have got a re-recording of Cry As I Fall, which was one of the band's original songs from the early days. And then after that, we have 3 demo run-throughs of the shorter tracks on here, Crimson Tide, Faithful Heart, and Waiting for the Daisies. This might very well be the last Hammerhead album. Brian Hodgson is approaching 70, and there comes a time when even the old heavy metal rocker type guys do have to take a seat, get off the stage, take their final bow. However, Buzz Elliott is still kind of the motivating driving force of the band, and he has had a dialogue with the others saying he would be interested maybe in keeping the band going in some capacity even after the old boys retire. So who knows what will happen with Hammerhead. But for now, this album here, Lords of the Sun, is fresh out just 2 months ago. Give it a listen more if you like. Check out some of their older stuff. Destroyer and The Sin Eater are still available. Headonism was only ever available as vinyl, but you can probably find something out there somewhere. And that's my story about Hammerhead. I'd like to extend a huge thank you to Buzz Elliott, first of all for contacting me in the first place. And about that, the reason why he contacted me was way back when Music is a Journey made its very first ever video. It was a video commemorating the life work of Colin Tench, an English guitarist who had passed away in 2017. And Buzz was doing a program, a radio program for deepnuggets.com, and he wanted to do a special on Colin Tench and asked me if he could use some sound clips from my video in his radio program. And then more recently, several months ago actually, he contacted me again and asked if I would be interested in doing a program together with him, because now he was also working for progzilla.com. And he wanted to do a special Colin Tench program, a new version. So we decided to do one together where we would each pick a selection of songs and each give our commentary, and then also have an online chat with Zoom. That online chat was also included in the final broadcast, which was actually just last week. And Buzz has since sent me the link to the program, so I'm going to add that in the description for this video so that you can, if you want, go and listen to that 3-hour-long program with lots of great music, as well as Buzz and I having our chat. So anyway, that's a big thanks to Buzz for all that. Also, he sent me this CD. He also sent me all the digital files of the Will to Survive, Headonism, and The Sin Eater. I have recently purchased a copy of The Sin Eater. I've ordered it anyway, as well as Destroyer, so I'm waiting for those to arrive. So I am actually spending money on Hammerhead Buzz. And he also answered a lot of my questions and sent me a lot of links to videos or online interviews where I could read about the background history of Hammerhead. So many thanks to Buzz Thanks so much for that. And everybody else, thank you so much for watching. I hope, Hammerhead has tickled your interest a little bit. Do check out the band some more. Thanks for watching this video, and we'll catch you again in the next one sometime in the near future. See you then. Bye.